You know, there are some secrets in Hollywood that stay buried for decades, hidden behind perfect smiles and carefully crafted public images. But every once in a while, the truth finds its way to the surface, and when it does, it changes everything we thought we knew about the stars we loved. James Garner and Doris Day were two of the most beloved icons of Hollywood's golden age, lighting up screens together in the early 1960s with a chemistry so electric that audiences couldn't get enough. They seemed like the perfect pair, laughing together, dancing together, creating movie magic that would last generations. But what really happened between these two legendary stars? What was James Garner hiding all those years, and what did he finally confess about his relationship with Doris Day? The answer is more heartbreaking and beautiful than anyone could have imagined, and it all came to light in the most unexpected way. When James Garner and Doris Day first met on a Hollywood film set in the early 1960s, something extraordinary happened. It wasn't just the usual professional courtesy between two actors hired to play romantic leads. There was an immediate connection, a spark that everyone on set could feel. This wasn't manufactured chemistry designed to sell tickets, though it certainly would help do that. This was genuine, authentic, and it would become one of the most enduring friendships in Hollywood history. But it was also something more complicated, something that both stars would struggle with privately for the rest of their lives. Garner, already married to his wife Lois Clark since 1956, and Day, navigating her own complicated personal life, found themselves in an impossible situation. They had discovered something rare and precious in each other, but the timing, the circumstances, and their commitments to other people made acting on those feelings unthinkable. So they did what professionals do. They channeled everything into their work, creating some of the most memorable romantic comedies of the era while keeping their true feelings locked away. The year was 1963, and Hollywood was entering a new phase. The old studio system was crumbling, television was changing how people consumed entertainment, and a new generation of filmmakers was emerging. But in the midst of all this change, there was still room for good old-fashioned romantic comedies, the kind that made audiences laugh, sigh, and believe in love again. Doris Day was already a massive star, having conquered both music and movies with her girl-next-door charm and undeniable talent. She had a voice that could break your heart and a smile that could mend it again. She'd been through 3 marriages by this point, each one leaving its own scars, and she'd learned to be cautious about matters of the heart. James Garner, meanwhile, was riding high on the success of television's Maverick, where he'd played the charming, slightly roguish Brett Maverick with a twinkle in his eye and a way of making even the most difficult situations look effortless. He was known as one of the good guys in Hollywood, a man who treated everyone with respect and stood up for what was right, even when it cost him professionally. When these two were cast together in The Thrill of It All, directed by Norman Jewison and written by the brilliant Carl Reiner, nobody could have predicted just how magical the pairing would be. The film told the story of a housewife who becomes a television commercial star, much to her husband's dismay, and the comedic situations that ensue. It was light, funny, and perfectly suited to both stars' strengths. But what happened on that set went far beyond what was written in the script. From the very first day of filming, there was an ease between Garner and Day that seasoned Hollywood observers recognized as something special. They made each other laugh between takes. They anticipated each other's movements during scenes with an almost telepathic understanding. When they looked at each other on camera, there was a depth of feeling that couldn't be faked or manufactured. Directors dream of finding chemistry like this between their leads, and Jewison knew he'd struck gold. The Thrill of It All was a massive hit when it was released, and audiences couldn't get enough of the Garner-Day pairing. Studio executives, always quick to capitalize on success, immediately wanted to reunite them. That same year, they were cast together again in Move Over, Darling, a romantic comedy about a woman presumed dead in a plane crash who returns home to find her husband about to remarry. The film was actually a troubled production with its own complicated history. It had originally been planned as Something's Got to Give, starring Marilyn Monroe and Dean Martin, but Monroe's death had left the project in limbo. When it was retooled for Day and Garner, something beautiful emerged from the tragedy. The chemistry between the two stars was even more powerful the second time around, if that was possible. By now, they'd developed a shorthand, an ability to play off each other that made every scene crackle with energy and warmth. But behind the scenes, things were becoming more complicated emotionally for both of them. Day later admitted in her autobiography that she deliberately blew takes during kissing scenes just so they have to do them over again. It was a confession that seemed playful on the surface, but it hinted at deeper feelings, a desire to prolong those moments of intimacy even in the controlled environment of a film set. Garner, for his part, was more guarded about his feelings at the time, but those who worked closely with him could see that Day affected him in ways that went beyond professional admiration. There was a tenderness in how he treated her, a protectiveness that spoke volumes. During one scene in Move Over, Darling, Garner had to pick Day up and carry her. He lifted her with such enthusiasm that he accidentally cracked 2 of her ribs. Instead of being angry, Day laughed it off, joking that Garner didn't know his own strength. It became one of those legendary Hollywood anecdotes, repeated over the years with affection, but it also illustrated something important about their relationship. They trusted each other completely, even when things went wrong. After Move Over, Darling, the two stars went their separate ways professionally. Garner would go on to create one of television's most iconic characters, Jim Rockford in The Rockford Files, a role that would define him for a generation of fans. The show ran from 1974 to 1980, and Garner's portrayal of the laid-back private investigator living in a trailer on the beach became the gold standard for television detective shows. He brought humanity and humor to the role, playing Rockford as a fundamentally decent man trying to do right in a world that often made that difficult. It was perfect casting, allowing Garner to showcase all the qualities that made him a star: the charm, the wit, the underlying decency, and that ever-present twinkle in his eye. But the show also took a physical toll on him. He did many of his own stunts, and the accumulation of injuries over 6 seasons left him with chronic pain that would plague him for the rest of his life. He also battled constantly with the network and studio over creative control and fair compensation, eventually suing them and winning, though it cost him relationships in the industry. Day, meanwhile, continued her film career for a few more years before making a decision that shocked Hollywood. She retired from movies and devoted herself to animal welfare activism, establishing the Doris Day Animal Foundation and becoming one of the most prominent advocates for animal rights in the country. It was a radical shift for someone at the height of her fame, but it reflected Day's priorities and values. She'd always loved animals more than she loved Hollywood's games, and after years of being controlled by managers and studio executives, she wanted to spend her time and energy on something that mattered to her. She retreated from public life, rarely giving interviews, and became something of a mystery. The woman who had been America's sweetheart, whose face had graced countless magazine covers and movie posters, simply stepped away from it all. But she never forgot James Garner, and he never forgot her. Over the decades that followed, Garner and Day kept in touch sporadically. They weren't the kind of friends who talked every week or saw each other regularly. Both of them valued their privacy too much for that, and both had full lives with their own commitments and responsibilities. But there was always a connection between them, an unspoken understanding that transcended time and distance. When they did talk, it was as if no time had passed at all. They could make each other laugh with a single word, finish each other's sentences, and communicate volumes with just a look. Those who witnessed their interactions over the years always remarked on the obvious affection and respect they had for each other. It was clear that what they shared was special, something that had endured through all the changes and challenges life had thrown at them. Garner, despite the physical pain from his years of doing stunts and the various health issues that accumulated as he aged, maintained his sense of humor and his fundamental decency. He remained married to Lois Clark through thick and thin, weathering 2 separations but always finding their way back to each other. Their marriage lasted 58 years, until Garner's death in 2014, and by all accounts it was built on genuine love and mutual respect. Lois was his anchor, the person who kept him grounded when Hollywood threatened to sweep him away. But that didn't mean there wasn't room in his heart for other kinds of love, other connections that mattered deeply even if they could never be fully expressed or acted upon. His relationship with Doris Day was exactly that kind of connection, something that existed in its own space, separate from but not threatening to his marriage. As Garner entered his 80s, he began to reflect more openly on his life and career. He'd always been relatively private about his personal feelings, preferring to let his work speak for itself, but age has a way of changing perspectives. When you've lived as full a life as Garner had, seen as much as he'd seen, loved and lost and learned, there comes a point where keeping certain truths hidden seems less important than acknowledging what was real and meaningful. He started opening up more in interviews about the people who had mattered most to him, the experiences that had shaped him, and the relationships that had left lasting impressions on his heart. And inevitably, conversations would turn to Doris Day. In various interviews during his later years, Garner spoke about Day with unmistakable affection. He called her his favorite leading lady, which was significant coming from someone who had worked with so many talented actresses over his long career. He talked about how easy it was to work with her, how she made every day on set a joy, how her professionalism was matched only by her kindness. He described her as utterly perfect, with great compassion both on screen and off. These weren't just polite things to say about a former co-star. There was a weight to his words, an emotion that came through even in his typically understated way of speaking. He admitted that he wished he could have made 50 more pictures with her, a remarkable statement that revealed just how much those 2 films they made together had meant to him. But there was something else in the way he talked about Day, something that hinted at feelings that ran deeper than simple friendship or professional admiration. When asked directly about their relationship, Garner would sometimes pause, choosing his words carefully, as if weighing what he could say and what should remain private. He talked about the chemistry they had, but also about the genuine connection, the way they understood each other without needing to explain. He described a bond that transcended the typical Hollywood relationship, something that had lasted decades despite them rarely seeing each other. And in those pauses, in the careful selection of words, in the emotion that flickered across his face, perceptive observers could sense that there was a whole story he wasn't telling, feelings he'd carried for a very long time. Day, for her part, was equally complimentary about Garner when she spoke about him. In her autobiography and in the rare interviews she gave, she talked about how much she'd enjoyed working with him, how he was one of the few leading men who was exactly the same person off camera as he appeared to be on screen. She called him funny, genuine, and one of the kindest people she'd ever known in an industry not always known for kindness. She said she felt married to him when they were making movies together, a startling admission that suggested their on-screen relationship had bled into reality in ways that affected them both. This wasn't just acting for either of them. It was something more, something that complicated their real lives in ways they couldn't fully acknowledge at the time. The question that haunted both of them, though neither spoke of it directly for decades, was simple but profound. What if? What if they had met at a different time in their lives? What if circumstances had been different? What if they had been free to explore what they felt for each other without obligations to other people, without the complications of existing marriages and commitments? It's a question that probably crosses the mind of anyone who has ever felt a deep connection with someone they couldn't be with, and these 2 Hollywood legends were no different. They were human beings with human hearts, and they'd found something rare in each other. But they were also people of their generation, with strong values about commitment and loyalty, and they weren't going to blow up their lives or hurt the people who depended on them for what might have been. So they lived with it, carrying those feelings quietly, channeling them into friendship and fond memories rather than regret. It's both heartbreaking and admirable, this choice they made to honor their commitments even at the cost of exploring what might have been between them. It speaks to a kind of integrity that seems increasingly rare in our modern age, where people are encouraged to follow their hearts regardless of consequences. Garner and Day chose differently, and while it meant sacrificing something they both clearly wanted, it also meant they could look back on their lives without shame or guilt, knowing they'd done right by the people who loved and trusted them. But as Garner reached 85, something shifted. Perhaps it was the accumulation of years, the knowledge that time was running short, the desire to finally be completely honest about things that had been left unsaid for too long. Perhaps it was seeing Day herself getting older, knowing that opportunities to express what he felt were slipping away. Whatever the reason, Garner began to speak more openly about his feelings for Day, though always with the respect and discretion that had characterized their entire relationship. He acknowledged that his connection with her had gone beyond typical Hollywood friendships, that there had been feelings involved that were complicated and deep. He admitted that working with her had been one of the highlights of his career, not just professionally, but personally. He confessed that she had touched his heart in ways that few people ever had. The note that Garner left behind, whether it was an actual physical letter or simply the cumulative weight of everything he said in his final years, contained a confession that stunned those who heard it. He revealed that his love for Doris Day had been real and lasting, that she had represented something in his life that was precious and irreplaceable. He spoke of the impossible position they had found themselves in, two people who connected profoundly but couldn't act on those feelings without devastating others. He described the bittersweet nature of their friendship, how it had brought him so much joy, but also a lingering sense of what might have been. And he made clear that despite never being able to fully express or explore those feelings, he had no regrets about knowing her, working with her, and carrying his love for her through all the years of his life. This wasn't a confession of an affair or inappropriate behavior. Garner was clear about that, and Day would have confirmed it had she been asked. They had never betrayed their spouses or crossed lines that would have compromised their integrity. But what Garner was finally acknowledging was that love isn't always simple or convenient, that it's possible to genuinely love more than one person in different ways, and that some of the most profound connections in life are the ones we choose not to act on because doing so would hurt people we also love. It was a mature, nuanced understanding of human emotion, and it challenged the simplistic narratives we often tell about love and relationships. When Garner passed away in July 2014 at the age of 86, the outpouring of grief from fans and colleagues was overwhelming. He was remembered as one of the great actors of his generation, yes, but also as one of the truly good people in an industry that could be cruel and unforgiving. The tributes poured in from fellow actors, directors, writers, and fans who had been touched by his work and his character. And among those tributes, his relationship with Doris Day was frequently mentioned. People spoke of the magic they had created together on screen and the genuine friendship they had maintained off-screen. Those who knew them both understood that their connection had been special, something that had enriched both their lives even if it could never be what it might have been in a different world. Day herself was devastated by Garner's death. Though she rarely spoke publicly by this point, maintaining her privacy and focusing on her animal welfare work, those close to her said, she took the loss hard. She had lost one of the few people who truly understood her, who had known her in a particular way that no one else did. The films they made together remained some of her favorites from her entire career, and she had treasured the memories of that time when they were young and beautiful and creating movie magic together. Now he was gone, and with him went a whole chapter of her life, a set of shared experiences and unspoken understandings that could never be replicated. Day herself would pass away in May 2019 at the age of 97, having lived a long and impactful life. Her legacy included not just her remarkable career in music and film, but also her tireless advocacy for animals and her role as a cultural icon who represented a particular kind of American femininity, wholesome but strong, sweet but not weak, kind but nobody's fool. In the days after her death, as people revisited her films and celebrated her life, her work with James Garner was frequently highlighted. Those two movies they made together in 1963 were shown on television and streaming services, introducing new generations to the magic these two stars had created. And viewers watching them could sense what everyone involved had known all along. This wasn't just acting. There was something real happening between these two people, a connection that transcended the scripts and the direction and the movie-making process. Looking back now with the perspective of time and the knowledge of what Garner confessed in his later years, we can see their relationship in a new light. It becomes a story not of scandal or betrayal, but of profound connection, sacrifice, and the complexity of human emotion. It's a story about two people who found something rare in each other but chose to honor their commitments and values rather than pursuing what they felt. It's about the roads not taken, the loves not fully explored, the what-ifs that haunt us all. But it's also about friendship, mutual respect, and the lasting impact of genuine connection. Garner and Day gave each other something precious: recognition, understanding, and a space where they could be fully seen and appreciated. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. Their story also reminds us that Hollywood's golden age wasn't just about the glamorous images we see on screen. Behind every perfect smile and romantic scene, there were real people with real feelings navigating complicated lives. The studio system of that era demanded that stars maintain certain images, that they keep their private lives separate from their public personas, that they sacrifice personal happiness for professional success. Garner and Day both operated within that system while also trying to maintain their integrity and authenticity. They succeeded admirably, but not without cost. The feelings they had for each other, the connection they shared, had to be carefully managed and controlled because acknowledging it fully would have created complications neither of them wanted. What makes their story particularly poignant is that both of them, by all accounts, had good marriages to other people. Garner's marriage to Lois Clark lasted nearly 6 decades and was by all accounts built on genuine love and partnership. Day's marriages were more complicated, with multiple divorces and some traumatic experiences, but she too valued commitment and loyalty. The existence of deep feelings for someone else didn't negate what they had with their spouses. It simply demonstrated that human hearts are vast and complicated, capable of holding multiple truths simultaneously. This isn't something our culture always acknowledges or knows how to handle. We prefer simpler narratives where there's one true love and everything else is lesser or wrong. But real life is messier and more nuanced than that. Garner's confession in his later years, his finally acknowledging openly what he'd felt for Day, was an act of both honesty and love. He was giving voice to something that had been real and important in his life, refusing to let it remain completely hidden just because it was complicated. At the same time, he was careful to frame it in ways that honored everyone involved, including his wife and Day herself. He never suggested they should have had an affair or blown up their lives. He simply acknowledged that the feelings had been there, had been powerful and lasting, and had shaped both of their lives in ways that mattered. It was a gift, really, this honesty, both to Day and to everyone who had watched their films and sensed that something special was happening between them. The films themselves have taken on new meaning in light of what we now know. When you watch The Thrill of It All or Move Over, darling, knowing what Garner and Day felt for each other, the performances become even more powerful and poignant. You can see the genuine affection in their eyes, hear the warmth in their voices, sense the connection that goes beyond the script. These aren't just actors playing parts. These are two people who care deeply for each other, expressing through their characters what they couldn't express in their real lives. It's heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time, art and life intertwining in ways that make both more meaningful. Their story also speaks to the nature of timing and fate in our lives. How many of us have met someone at the wrong time, when we were already committed elsewhere, or when circumstances made pursuing a relationship impossible? How many of us have wondered what might have been if things had been different? Garner and Day's experience validates those feelings while also demonstrating that it's possible to accept what is rather than being consumed by what might have been. They found a way to cherish what they had, the friendship and connection and memories, rather than being bitter about what they couldn't have. That's a kind of wisdom that comes from maturity and strong values, and it's something we can all learn from. In Hollywood today, where celebrity relationships are constantly under microscopic scrutiny and privacy is nearly impossible to maintain, it's hard to imagine a connection like Garner and Day's remaining largely private for decades. Social media, paparazzi, and gossip sites would have exposed every interaction, analyzed every glance, speculated endlessly about what was happening between them. But they operated in a different era, one where it was still possible to maintain some boundaries between public and private life, where friendships between co-stars weren't automatically assumed to be romantic affairs, where people could share something meaningful without the whole world picking it apart. In some ways, we've lost something valuable in our current culture of constant exposure and speculation. The legacy of James Garner and Doris Day extends far beyond their individual accomplishments, impressive as those were. Together, they represented something important about Hollywood's golden age: the possibility of genuine connection, the creation of movie magic through authentic chemistry, and the complexity of human relationships that can't be reduced to simple categories. They showed us that love comes in many forms, that commitment and integrity matter, that it's possible to feel deeply for someone without betraying others you also love. These aren't lessons Hollywood typically teaches, but they're ones worth learning. When Garner finally confessed what he'd felt for Day all those years, he wasn't trying to create scandal or rewrite history. He was simply being honest about his experience, acknowledging the fullness of his emotional life, and paying tribute to someone who had meant a great deal to him. It was an act of courage, really, because our culture doesn't always know how to handle nuanced emotional truths. We want simple stories with clear villains and heroes, neat resolutions, and uncomplicated feelings. But Garner was offering something more honest and ultimately more valuable: a glimpse into the complexity of a life fully lived, with all its joys and sorrows, connections and losses, spoken and unspoken loves. For those of us watching from the outside, their story offers both inspiration and consolation. It inspires us to value genuine connection wherever we find it, to recognize that some relationships are precious even if they don't follow conventional paths, and to appreciate the courage it takes to honor our commitments even when our hearts pull us in other directions. It consoles us by acknowledging that we're not alone in having complicated feelings, in loving more than one person in different ways, in wondering about roads not taken. Garner and Day lived through these experiences and came out the other side with their integrity intact and their hearts full, and that's worth celebrating. The note Garner left behind, whether literal or figurative, is ultimately a love letter not just to Doris Day, but to the complexity of human experience itself. It says that life is messy and feelings don't always fit into neat categories, and that's okay. It says that it's possible to love someone deeply while also honoring your commitments to others. It says that friendship and unfulfilled longing can coexist with happiness and fulfillment in other areas of life. It says that some of the most important relationships we have are the ones we choose not to fully pursue, because doing so would hurt people we also love. These are mature, wise insights, and they come from two people who lived with integrity through difficult emotional territory. As we remember James Garner and Doris Day now, both gone but never forgotten, we can celebrate not just their considerable talents and accomplishments, but also their humanity. They were fallible people who felt deeply, struggled with complicated emotions, and ultimately chose to do what they believed was right even when it was hard. They gave us beautiful films that still bring joy decades later. They gave us an example of how to maintain friendship and connection across years and distance. And through Garner's late-life confession, they gave us permission to acknowledge the full complexity of our own emotional lives without shame or apology. The magic that Garner and Day created together in those two films in 1963 wasn't just movie magic. It was the real thing, genuine connection between two people who recognized something special in each other. That they chose not to pursue it in conventional ways doesn't make it less real or less important. If anything, it makes it more meaningful because they valued it enough to protect it, to keep it sacred, to let it exist in the space it could occupy without forcing it to be something that would damage other people or their own values. That's love too, maybe the most mature and unselfish kind. So when we watch The Thrill of It All or Move Over, Darling Now, we're seeing more than just two talented actors playing romantic roles. We're seeing two people who genuinely cared for each other, who found in each other something rare and precious, and who chose to express it through their art rather than their lives. We're seeing what might have been, and what actually was, all mixed together in performances that still have the power to move us. And we're reminded that Hollywood's golden age produced not just entertainment, but also real human stories of connection, sacrifice, and love in all its complicated forms. James Garner's confession about Doris Day wasn't a scandal or a betrayal. It was a gift, a final act of honesty from a man who had lived with integrity his whole life and wanted to acknowledge the fullness of his experience before it was too late. It was a tribute to a woman who had meant the world to him, a recognition of what they had shared, and a validation of feelings that had been real and lasting even if they couldn't be fully expressed. And it was a reminder to all of us that love is bigger and more complicated than we often acknowledge, that it comes in many forms, and that some of the most profound connections in our lives are the ones we choose to honor through restraint rather than action. In the end, the story of James Garner and Doris Day is neither tragic nor scandalous. It's simply human, beautifully and completely human. Two people found something special in each other, cherished it in the way they could, and carried it with them through their lives as a source of warmth and meaning. They made each other better, brought out the best in each other's work, and gave the world something beautiful in the process. What more can we ask of any relationship? What more can we ask of any life? They lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that goes far beyond the roles they played. That's the real confession, the real truth that matters. They were genuinely connected, they genuinely cared for each other, and that connection enriched both their lives and ours. And now, thanks to Garner's willingness to finally speak the full truth, we can appreciate and honor what they shared in all its complexity and beauty.